Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Stream Hatchet Brands in Gaming webinar.
Actually, sorry, 2 seconds. I
never
need
mind.
to fix
All good.
something
Yeah, all good. Just let
on
me know.
LinkedIn.
Yeah, when I start talking, you can just switch to the agenda slide.
Yeah. Um, yeah.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Stream Hatchet webinar for brands and best practices around gaming. I will be your host today, Jake Phillips, Chief Revenue Officer over at Stream Hatchet. We have a large panel of great guests who will go through introductions here today. But just to kind of give a quick introduction and overview of kind of what we're going to cover today is obviously as brands and people activate throughout gaming and esports, it's important to know why people do it, what they do to activate most effectively. And then most importantly, past live streaming, influencers, esports, kind of what is the right strategy and how can you kind of build out and really understand kind of a fully holistic strategy around gaming and this audience. Today we have, as I said, a large panel of guests with us. I'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves and we'll kind of start top to bottom. So Shelby, go ahead and kick us off.
Hi there, I'm Shelby Highstein. I work at an agency called Wasserman, where I run strategy and insights for one of our clients that's invested in gaming, and that's AT&T. We've been talking about gaming probably since 2018 when we made some of our first investments, but it's been a fun, I guess, almost 4 years now working in gaming, and have helped a bunch of other clients within Wasserman's portfolio think about the best ways to enter the space. And it's been a wild ride, and it's one that keeps going and keeps changing.
Awesome. Thank you, Shelby. Cody? Oh, sorry, Lewis. Can't even see the head straight today.
Lewis, go ahead. I'll go either way. Sure. I'm Lewis Timchack. I'm the Vice President of Sales at Pitfalls. We are a YouTube management company and network administrator partner for the majority of the top esports teams and talent agencies out there, including NRG, Optic, FaZe Clan, and agencies like UTA and Abrams. And we help teams and agencies monetize YouTube from both a paid media standpoint in terms of their live media executions, as well as optimizations and a ton of digital rights management. So we're very much embedded in the YouTube world of helping teams make the most and accelerate revenue on the platform.
My turn. Hey guys, I'm Jimmy Baratta. I work for Holodeck Ventures. We are a multi-channel media company focused exclusively on the metaverse, on crypto, on esports and gaming. So some of our projects that you may have heard of are the Business of Esports podcast. We just produced Camp Canut on Twitch, which ran for the last month, as well as the esports vertical for Comic-Con in Los Angeles this December.
Awesome. And I'm Cody Taduran. I'm the sales director here for Stream Hatchet. Alongside of Jake, I'll be helping to kind of moderate because these three are going to have a ton of great insights that we're just excited to start to dive into here. So
awesome. Great. So today we're going to be covering kind of a few different areas. So first thing we really want to hop into is the opportunity for brands in gaming. So why are brands so interested in this space, and why is it a good reason to have your focus and your budgets allocated towards it? Second piece, how brands can reach gamers. So there are obviously a lot of different tactics. I think as we look at live streaming versus a lot of other avenues, there are a lot of different but benefit and kind of negatives to each of those solutions. So understanding kind of how to best reach them. Then we're going to kind of run through the power of live streaming, how it's grown, how it can kind of last as evergreen content through a lot of VOD and traditional social content. And then lastly, we're going to just run it through a few use cases to kind of chat through what has gone well, what we see people leveraging in the space, and how you can kind of educate yourself on that. Awesome. So we'll kind of start with why brands invest in gaming. So as everybody knows, 40% of millennials play video games during the pandemic. So 18 to 34-year-olds, obviously a very important demographic for brands to reach. There's a really solid growth in this sector. So 2/3 of Americans play video games overall, which is obviously really indicative of kind of where entertainment has gone for this younger generation. Esports watch time has increased 116%. And we really feel like, I think an analogy I often like to make is when you think about traditional influencer marketing or traditional advertising, usually it is focused on as many quick hits as possible so you can try to give the highest percentage for the best outcome. Where I feel like these experiences and activations really hold a lot different weight is in the sense that these audiences are spending a lot of time with given brands, given influencers, and the folks and partners that they're activating with. So I think that's a really big piece to kind of uncover, but would love to understand a bit more. And Shelby, maybe you could chime in here on kind of why brands over at Wasserman are really considering gaming, and outside of the obvious here, what else is really drawing them to the audience?
I think there's a couple things. I think, when you think about where traditional advertising spend has gone, sports has been the biggest recipient of a lot of that money. But the engagement with that younger audience has really declined, and most sports are seeing, slight declines over time. So I think that's one of the big reasons that we saw, and why we sort of pivoted as a way to get younger. But I also think gaming provides a little bit more of a 1v1 experience where you can be the next esports player. It's possible. No matter how hard I try, I'm never going to make it in the NFL. As a 5'3" woman, that would never be able to happen. But I think there's something about that you can watch your favorites do something amazing, but it's a reachable space. It's something that, I can play, I can learn from them. So I think the way that it goes with participation as well as watching, I think that's something that's really important to that younger audience too. So I think, both the need to shift away, and again, shift part of our budget away from sports. Sports still draws a lot of eyes.
Of course.
And also that interactivity, I think are things that really are driving a lot of the investment in gaming and esports.
Yeah, I think you touch on a really interesting point when I think barrier to entry. I think even more so, even like I will be the first to admit I am not the best at Call of Duty. I am not the best at Halo, but I have gotten an overkill once and I have gotten a triple kill once. So I've had little glimmers of hope, but I think kind of conversely to that, I have never caught a game-winning reception. And I think there are very few people that probably have. But again, the barrier to entry and the relatability, I think that's a really good point to hit. Lewis, Jimmy, anything you guys would add to this?
Sorry, we didn't want to step on each other's toes. I see us both unmuting at the same time. From my perspective, where we kind of just cover a lot of stories on our programming and our show, and we're always trying to follow what brands are getting involved and for what reasons. And I think, the engagement can't be undersold, right? The times of billboards, I think, in Times Square or in mega cities, that's really a vanity play, right? That's a mind share, I think, play, but there's no measurable ROI there. That's because maybe an artist coming out with an album wants to see his face in his hometown, not necessarily because they know that they're going to move so many units based off of that activation. So I think when brands get into gaming, it's also just, this is the next generation of media, right? It went from radio and television to then you had interactive ads on your Hulu if you didn't pay for the ad-free version, where maybe you can watch one ad versus a different depending on your preference. And here it's a step further, right, where the ad is actually integrated into the content itself. And so that engagement that the brands are having directly with their audience is beyond valuable, because you're creating these connections with the audience that transcend the medium that you're activating on, and something that audience then retains after the stream, after that program is over.
Yeah.
So I think that can't be understated, and it's kind of definitely piggybacking off of what Shelby had just said there.
Yeah. Lewis, I'll let you kind of round out this slide.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with what Jimmy was saying. It really has become the attention economy, and that's, I think, the most important thing. And I've heard, multiple brands and agencies talk about this. Where are people spending their time, and what are they giving their attention to? And the majority of, millennials, Gen Z, are spending their time gaming or watching gaming content. So the ability to be able to really integrate in meaningful ways, not only in the programming, but around the programming,
Yeah.
It really delivers a much richer and deeper experience. There's much more engagement. There's much more attention to be had for your brands and for your integrations, and to be able to support and really deliver value as a brand or a sponsor to these content creators, to these leagues, to these teams. It really does pay much higher dividends as opposed to just running a 30-second spot across ESPN. You can really start targeting much more effectively. You can really start becoming a much larger part of the conversation. So it really has offered a very unique and very cool trajectory in terms of growth, in terms of, like I said, integrations, really being able to chip away at all those different interactions that are available through these platforms.
Yep. Totally agree. Well, let's hop to the next slide here and kind of go through a few of these pieces of code. So here are kind of the categories of how you can activate within kind of the gaming ecosystem as we see. Cody, do you want to kind of run through a couple of the highs and lows here of positives and negatives, some kind of good things and bad things about each of these?
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, I think one of the unique kind of value props of esports and gaming as a whole is certainly these activations aren't limited to these 4 buckets, but we thought kind of holistically these 4 buckets is the traditional or kind of best practices of how we've seen brands start to market and activate within gaming. So you'll see here we have paid media in-game. This is obviously becoming way more prevalent with things like Fortnite activations, the metaverse, being able to kind of get really creative with how you're actually bringing actual conversations with in-game, really cool, unique in-game activations, sponsoring influencers, whether that's for, a sponsored tournament, sponsored streams, sponsored campaigns, all that good stuff. And then trying to correlate back to what Shelby was originally talking about with traditional sports dollars is esports, which I think is growing, as Jake mentioned on the first slide. Esports since 2018, we've seen, for the market as a whole, we've kind of seen live streaming start to kind of maybe be a little static at times, but throughout the pandemic, throughout the last few years, esports has always been on the rise. So obviously there's a huge opportunity there. And then all 4 of these things have their pros and cons. I don't know if off the top of any of y'all's head, Shelby, Lewis, Jimmy, if there's a particular type of activation that you guys see as being kind of more valuable than any of the others.
On our side, I think for brands, I think it all has its place. It depends what you're trying to achieve and really the audience you're trying to reach. I think most of where we focus has probably been, paid influencers in esports. But I think we've seen, at least in the last year or so, a big gravitation to those influencers who are in some ways their own media networks, really, with the fandom that they have. And in a lot of ways, that's what brings a lot of interest to it. And I always laugh when I'm looking, at different Twitch streams, and there's like a stream of someone like just chatting, and thousands of people are watching this person, play casually, chat a little bit. And that's just not, the type of thing you get to see in a lot of other spaces. So I think we're definitely gravitating sort of using influencers more with a lot of the brands that we use. And I think the great thing is there's also a lot more flexibility there about what you can do with them. It can range from anything from, branded streams. We've also done some really like large scale programs with influencers to even just like, promoting other things that we do in the space through social media. So I think that the flexibility and like the cachet that they bring has probably caused a bunch of our investment to pivot that way. But I do think that all of these things have a place to play, and it just depends what the brand really is trying to achieve.
I want to add to that, one of my favorite activations or companies that activates marketing campaigns in gaming is probably Epic and Fortnite, right? You see their marketing activations for TV shows, for luxury, fashion, for concerts and movies, and whether it's microtransactions and purchasing in-game, skins and collectibles, whether it's playing an LTM that's only available, during that activation, or whether it's participating and kind of watching the live event, right? They're hitting it on all of these different keynotes, and all of them are, back to our previous conversation, immersive experiences, inviting the audience to partake in it. They're obviously selling directly through that activation, but then there's a lasting marketing effect where if I buy the Balenciaga hoodie for my character in Fortnite, maybe I want to go buy the Balenciaga hoodie in real life too, and so that form of marketing kind of stays with you. So yeah, I don't know who, as far as the developers, who's doing it better. I definitely give them a lot of props for that, but they found their sweet spot. And, I think we all know, we can all probably list 5 different, at least, activations that Fortnite's done. And all of us might even have 5 different ones because there's just been so many to this point.
I would certainly love to get a Balenciaga hoodie. I don't think anybody's can afford one, but that'd be
Quick
great.
plug.
I know, right? I think to Jimmy and Shelby's point, I think each and every one of these has its role, right? What we've seen has been really effective is that, a lot of brands and agencies are really curious. They're gaming curious about where best to invest their money. And I think it ultimately comes down to what kind of results and KPIs they're delivering against. Where we've seen some interesting things is that some larger brands say, should we go in game? Should we go influencer? Should we go esports? And an interesting story that we like to tell is that, you can actually use paid media to help direct that and dictate it, right? Paid media really offers, as you mentioned on your slide here, great measurement, great quality, and tremendous amount of data and analytics. And where brands can leverage that data and analytics is through paid media campaigns where you're targeting specific games, you're targeting specific influencers, you're targeting specific teams. And the ability to really leverage that data and analytics to say, did my brand resonate more with a League of Legends audience, or did it resonate better with a Rocket League or Fortnite or Call of Duty? And really taking that ability to use the paid side of it to influence those larger investments has really gone a long way.
That is a fascinating point to hit on. I think that because one thing I was going to push back on a little bit. Yes, gaming is great. Gaming is really exciting, but I think attribution is one of the hardest things to measure within this ecosystem. It's really hard, even if you do an in-game, you're partnering with an influencer, they have a creator code for a Fortnite skin. Maybe they transact a month or 2 later because obviously like there might not be urgency if they've been a paid subscriber for a long time and then they finally use it, they forget to use the creator code. So I think direct correlation for a lot of that can be pretty difficult. But I think, Lewis, that's a really interesting piece to bring up, is to kind of let paid dictate your conversion rate. There is going to dictate audience's response to you. We do something similar with, so if there's a campaign going on with a couple influencers, we can do kind of an analysis to find out what channels did that audience come from before they were watching the influencer, and then where did they go after? Because that's also going to dictate, hey, we did a Call of Duty tournament with these 5 influencers, and then we saw that 60% of that audience also likes watching Valorant. Great, I have my next game that I'm going to activate with. Because I think there's not a lot of, I think due to the newness of this ecosystem, I don't think a lot of people may know that that's even a possibility. So I think would love to know any additional kind of pitfalls, and Shelby, feel free to chime in there. But are there kind of any worries like across this? I feel like influencers have definitely grown and the pie has grown for that, but maybe sponsorship's been a little bit slower to come along with it, but would love your thoughts there.
Well, I mean, I think the pitfalls with influencers is that they're people.
Yeah.
And
that's fair.
And, when you're representing, a huge brand, there are people that may do something or may not do something that you want them to do that you don't want to, ladder your brand up to. I think even one of the things we've struggled with in the beginning of gaming is a lot of the most popular games can be viewed a little bit violently.
Mm-hmm.
And whether a brand wants to associate with that type of content is something that's been a challenge. And even we can, we try and do a lot of like cross vertical integration. So bringing gaming to an NBA event or things like that. And we'll run into a lot of times that the leagues, because it's a more like fan friendly event, don't want certain types of games there. So I think, there's two really different, with influencers, there's definitely the pitfalls of their people. By the way, that's influencers across everything, though, whether you're music, sports, or everywhere. That is always something to be concerned about, and why we have really great lawyers on our team that write really great contracts. But I think with esports there, and then with esports there is like the violent nature, and then the last thing that I will say is, there's also getting over the hump of people who aren't in gaming and getting them to understand the value there.
Sure.
And I think that's something that we face all the time. And it's something that will be easier and easier to explain as it grows. But despite the scale of gaming, there's a lot of people outside of the gaming industry who still think it's like a niche space.
Yeah, I think that's something Cody and I hear quite a bit. And I think the more we can continue to educate, the better off it'll be. But yeah, hopefully there's a tipping point, because I feel like I have a lot of these same talk tracks every year of like, next year it's going to be the biggest. But I think it really has been a measured step-by-step forward. And I think actually our next slide will show that.
And real quick before you jump back into that, just another point that I was thinking of when we were before, when Jake and I were talking about the different negatives behind all these, he did bring up how tough it is for attribution. But I think, Shelby touched on it, how it's sometimes just kind of taking that leap of faith to get more data points involved. But like being able to compare these activations is tough, because how can you, for paid media, you can say, hey, we're used to buying this spot in traditional sports, the same sort of, logo on the screen, X to Y, kind of more apples to apples. But how can you really compare an in-game Fortnite concert activation? So it's really tough to kind of find, it's one thing to land on what metrics important to a brand, but then compare like, hey, we figured out the metrics, but this hasn't really been done before. So was it successful? Yes or no? So I think we're very excited to see more and more of these sort of things pop up, so we can get the relative data points to get more and more brands feel comfortable and spin, because obviously the old a rising tide, lifts all ship sort of thing. Yeah, we need a lot of that for those sort of things.
That's a fantastic point, Cody. I think the opportunity for innovation is infinite here.
Right.
The best esports activation hasn't happened yet, right? It's just going to keep getting better and better and more integrated as we go on. But no, I think that's a really, really good spot to bring up. Awesome. So this right here, what we're looking at is a graph of sponsored stream content and the hours watched that sponsored content has driven. So obviously since 2020, we have seen an enormous growth. I think that obviously is going to be a lot to do with the fact that sports kind of stopped altogether for a very good portion of time, and brands needed a place to put their dollars. But I think if we look at 2022 versus 21, I think we were still seeing a bit of that upturn in 2021 in Q1. But over the last 2 quarters, we've seen a fairly level playing field as far as total sponsored content and hours watched. So, and Jimmy, maybe we can start with you on this, but I guess why do you think that that's starting to level off? Or is it other opportunities? Is it maybe the saturation of a given game? I would love to kind of hear insight there.
This is a tougher one, definitely. You took the low-hanging fruit there on 2020 with the sports. But for 2022, I think it's, what we've seen are there aren't a lot of exciting titles that are out right now. This was a really down year for gaming. Everything was pushed to next year. So many releases that were delayed or scrapped altogether. You had, if you want to get into mobile, you had World of Warcraft, right? WoW Mobile that they scrapped completely this year. And then you have other titles. Like, I think Stray was one of the bigger titles of the year from an indie developer, where you're running around as a little cat. Looks really interesting, really fun, but we're not really talking Call of Duty here, or GTA 6, which everyone's obviously excited about with all the leaks that are happening. So I just think 2020 being a down year is and the amazing thing to me about that, though, is if you look at these numbers, comparing 2022 to 2021, especially Q2 and Q3.
Mm-hmm.
This is a down year, and we're pretty much on par, if not exceeding it in Q1 and Q4. So I think that's an incredibly optimistic story to tell is, hey, this is atypical. This may be COVID catching up with the gaming industry. There was a lot of consolidation, a lot of stalls and layoffs, but really also a lot of ramping up in Q4. Cyberpunk obviously back to where we all thought it would be and expected it to be. And like I said, a lot of optimism for 2023, which I think will tell a very different story.
I think that's a good point, Lewis. I'll throw to you in just a second. But I think from that perspective, it has been really low. And if we even think about a year prior to this, 2018 and 19, there was almost a little bit of a downturn than anything. And then 2020, we had an enormous kick up. And I think to your point, the fact that it is stuck around as solidly as it has, this fall still has there are more linear titles coming out with God of War coming out, the Harry Potter. That one's coming, I think, was postponed to Q1. But those two titles in themselves, I think, are really going to start generating a lot of that. But Lewis, for you guys, I guess, off of games being a little stagnant, I think we've even seen influencer content probably go down a little bit more. I think they want to play new stuff. And so that's been a little bit of a downturn. But from like an inventory perspective, how are kind of brands adjusting to that and maybe finding new ways to light it up?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's a couple points here. To Jimmy's point that, there's definitely been a dearth of games, right? Like there's been no Fall Guys, right? Fortnite has certainly fallen off a little bit. Among Us is no longer as popular, right? We definitely saw some really big indie trends over 2021 coming into 2022 that really carried a lot of these things. And I think the reason that things have sort of plateaued is that a lot of these big streamers and content creators really built their audience off of those titles, and what they've been able to do is maintain. Regardless of the game that they're playing, they've really developed their community and their personality, and they've really been able to build their own brands. So I feel like that's been a really powerful thing, right? Is they've been able to leverage these games, but they've also been able to sustain and to move on to other things. And it's been hard to grow audience, right? Like it's been interesting in finding ways, how can we build and grow audiences? And I think that's where we're all looking for, what's that next title going to be, right? We saw a lot of people transition into Warzone. They went from Fortnite to Warzone. And then, now everybody's kind of moving over to Valorant. So what's that going to be coming up into 2023? I think, it's yet to be seen what Overwatch 2 is going to do. I know when, GTA 6 comes out, I think that's going to be a big one as well. So, there has not been as many titles to drive as much growth. And I think that's why things have plateaued a little bit. And then beyond that, I feel that creators are getting more, more creative. They're actually, branching out. They're building off of their own audiences. They're really starting to be a little bit more, call it platform and game agnostic, which is also a benefit to them because, again, they're building their own brands. They're building their own personalities. It's not about the game I'm playing. It's about who I am. And that's an important factor that we look into this. I think another thing that may be worth noting is we've also seen a lot of transition from platform to platform, right? We've seen a lot of people move to TikTok, as Dan just mentioned. We see a lot of people moving away. Obviously, Facebook gaming, we don't even need to talk about. But, people are starting to move platforms. We see a big move going on from Twitch into YouTube, just given all of the different changes that are going on over there with the rev shares and things like that. So we are seeing a bit of a migration of audience. So that also might show a little bit of the stagnation. And then also, too, we're starting to see, some of the bigger streamers, really starting to decline in a little bit because people are starting to diversify who they're watching. So we're starting to see people sort of spreading their love and spreading their viewership across platform, across other channels. So again, you're not seeing the huge spikes from Ninja that we used to see. Shroud's numbers are down a little bit. XQC is in another he's on his own planet. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with all the gambling stuff that goes away. So we are seeing a lot of dynamic market conditions influencing all of this. Anyway, I think there's just a lot of factors that are going into 2023 that we should all be looking towards. New game titles, what content formats seem to be working, how are people transitioning in the times, and where are the eyeballs going? And that's where, Jake, your guys have done a great job of being able to articulate, like, we're seeing a lot of shifts going here and here, and we're seeing what's popping. And, as a brand, you definitely want to pay attention to that. You want to be able to follow the trends You want to be able to follow what's the new hot game. You want to be able to get in front of it as opposed to just kind of chasing the tail.
Yeah. Shelby, Cody, anything to add?
The only thing I would add too is there's also some of the big streamers are wanting to stream less.
Yeah.
You know, that they, you know, and
100% agree.
And that is something that, you know, if one of the big streamers is streaming less, and that's driving a lot of that, until that next big guy kind of breaks through, that's going to cause, you know, sort of the stagnation too. And just from beyond gaming, I think overall, and I don't, one of you guys mentioned earlier that there's this, you know, it's the attention market. Well, there's a lot more things for your attention. And I know we saw TikTok as one of them in the comments. Yes, that was something that I guess was starting in 2021, but now is like the only thing I hear about, especially from, you know, my younger colleagues on my team. Why aren't we doing more on TikTok is the question I get all the time. But I think there's that, but it's also, you know, some are going back to sports, or live music is happening a lot more again in 2022. And it was happening in 21 as well to a certain extent. But I think the comfortability with people doing some of this stuff has gone probably pretty close back to pre-pandemic levels in 2022. So I think that's also a lot of what's driven some stagnation is, you know, some of these most popular are, to say, you know, a cliche in the workplace, try and have a bit of a work-life balance and not stream, you know, 18 hours a day or something crazy like that. And then there are a lot of options out there for people right now. And so I still look at the story, and when I look at it, I'm still comparing 2020 to where we are now. And if you look at some of the quarters, I mean, it's still a giant, you know, 50% increase from 2020. So even if it does stagnate at this level, that's not a bad thing. It's a really high level. That's not, you know, I do think it will grow. And I think because of a lot of the things that, you know, Lewis and Jimmy said, but it's also harder to grow harder to grow when something's bigger. That's, you know, we talk about that with some of our other clients in certain sports. If there's already 100 million people watching, you know, your biggest game, you're going to run out of people, you know? So, and that's going to be a phenomenon that, you know, gaming may eventually get into too. The great thing is it appeals to younger people a lot more than other things. So as we age, hopefully if people stick with gaming, this industry will really continue to skyrocket and grow.
I would just add one thing, Shelby, as you mentioned, you know, there's so many choices, there's so many options. And I believe there was a recent statistic, I think it was maybe less than 2% of, you know, live streamers are actually making a living wage. So you're seeing a lot of hobbyists, you're seeing a lot of other people really putting out a ton of content. So there's a tremendous amount of options. So it really does kind of come down to how do you figure out what makes the most sense? Where are you going to get your reach? Where are you going to get your scale? How do you build that, you know, across multiple channels, multiple platforms? So just from a marketing standpoint, it sort of adds another factor into that equation, right? In terms of, there's only so many big influencers that are getting, you know, 5 figures in terms of, you know, concurrence. So how do you figure out which makes the most sense, and how do you identify and factor that into your overall plans?
Yeah.
You know, it's and one thing that I've always heard is you know, it's a lot easier to spend $100,000 than it is to spend $10,000, right? You want to be able to have scale and meaningful impressions and meaningful volume and share of voice to actually show results. And with that, you need scale, you need distribution, and you need reach. So those are all important factors that kind of go into these things. So it's interesting, Shelby, you bring up a good point. A lot of these guys are kind of scaling back on their streaming. So how do you find and fill those with other either like-minded or relevant channels that can make sense and from a campaign standpoint?
Yeah, which leads us right into our next slide. And this one, Lewis, especially for you with how much you guys are managing YouTube inventory and kind of the evergreen content. So obviously streaming is going to be at the center of most of these campaigns. And I think, Lewis, you bring up a really interesting point too. As we see more like mid-tier streamers, like it's okay if you're a mid-tier streamer who's making $100,000, $200,000 a year. That could be a perfectly good living where you're like, I can sustain myself as this, be a smaller opportunity to see grow. But as we saw before from Dan's comment, TikTok has become an enormous vehicle for evergreen content from streams, VOD clips, etc. Streams on demand on YouTube to be able to catch up and recap on an esports event or the whole stream itself. There's a lot of kind of triggers to these campaigns. So I know there's always kind of a debate. Streamers themselves don't always like to post tweets ahead of going live because they don't think it increases viewership. It does. Please do that. But there are kind of Twitter, I think, is a very unique platform. I don't know any other platform that has the ability to like, hey, I'm letting my gaming audience know I'm going live. I think that's a one-of-a-kind vehicle for this ecosystem. And I think what streaming does, and I think we've talked about this a lot, is fosters FOMO, right? You're riding kind of the hype train. Let's go into the games that we think are most successful, the influencers that are drawing the most value. There's kind of a level of exclusivity to it, to kind of activating with that person, as Shelby said, kind of that one-to-one experience. And then also there's just all of this kind of clutch moment gameplay that you're having all of the time. So just like I was screaming on my couch when a couple of Tyreek Hill's passes were actually getting caught after he's bobbling the ball, I was shouting out loud, but that happens all the time in stream as well. So how, Lewis, do you kind of see the landscape as a whole when we kind of think about, we have a lot of different taxes. Streaming is obviously one of them, but maybe we can start with you and then move towards Jimmy and Shelby.
Yeah, I think as a creator, you want to take advantage of every single platform that you have. And there's a couple different things you can do. One is, TikTok is fantastic for reach and audience building, terrible for monetization, right? I know they're trying to figure that out, but until monetization really turns on, I think there's TikTok is a great branding and awareness play as a creator to showcase what you're doing, get a broader audience, help bring them over to your monetization platforms, whether that be Twitch or YouTube. So TikTok has an interesting piece of it. The live stream element is fantastic. Again, regardless of the platform, you bring up a great point in terms of FOMO. You want to experience it live. You want to be there in the moment. It's an amazing opportunity to be there and live with your creators and experience that. And then on the back end of that, you want to think about, how can I continue that conversation? This is where VOD comes in, and it's really important, because you might have a fantastic 2-hour stream, and you might be streaming 50 hours a week, but you're creating amazing amounts of content. There should absolutely be content distribution plans across TikTok, across YouTube, across other platforms to keep that content living. Make all that content that you're work longer and harder, and monetize it better. So really becoming a master of all of these platforms is only going to help grow and build your creator brand. And then in addition, as if you're an advertiser or a brand, you should absolutely consider every single one of these touch points as well. If you're doing a sponsored stream, there of course should be some pre-stream texts, or tweets about this. Hey, I'm going live with my AT&T live stream where we're going to be playing and going over the best, whatever that may be. Leverage Twitter to pre-up, leverage your in-stream, leverage YouTube on the back end with your VODs. So now you're touching all of these various platforms. Now you're thinking much more holistically about your activations. It's not just going to live for that 1 hour or 2 hours in a live stream. It's going to have legs and live much longer. And that's an important piece to consider, is you want to think about, how can I extend the life of the content that I'm paying for, creating or sponsoring.
Sorry, guys, I had to unmute there. I think Lewis hit some amazing points there, and I don't disagree with a single one of them. What I wanted to actually do was expand upon a couple of those with some anecdotes that I've seen, because I think he summarized it perfectly. And anyone that's interested in streaming or in content creation, I mean, that right there was a masterclass lesson in like 30 seconds. I consider it adjacent to the Gary Vee model, right? If you're streaming, if you're creating any content anywhere, the plan should be to repurpose that content, re-edit it for as many downstream opportunities as possible, which Lewis spoke to, of course, as well as selling those downstream impressions, right? Maybe you have a sponsor that's interested in sponsoring your stream, but do they know that you're also putting that on TikTok or on YouTube or somewhere else where you're getting X million more, views and impressions that could be a separate deal altogether, or that you could sell to a separate sponsor altogether? One of the things that I wanted to harp on was, in a project that we did recently with Twitch, everyone says being authentic and genuine as this very important kind of topic. And, I think we all kind of smirk when we hear that, because it's just one of these things that's been really discussed a lot recently to death. super important to them and in a project that we did with them was not only having authentic partners and people that we were friends with that were part of that show and that program, but to Lewis's point and to Jake's point about tweeting about this event or about streaming, when you have these partners that are your friends, when you're doing a project and you're co-streaming with another streamer or you're working with a brand that you really like, that's when the tweets and the other promo on your other marketing networks and channels really have their most value, because you're not just tweeting because you're contractually required to, which you then see a lot of people deleting after the event. You're tweeting because you love being a part of that project, you're hyped, you're sharing it with your audience, and then you're leaving it up for however long. And those are the more meaningful, I think, promos too, are the ones that, you genuinely do care about, that speak to your brand, that speak to the project that you're working on. Yeah. So.
I was just going to add one other thing, Jimmy. You bring up a really good point about the brands getting involved. And, I think a great example of this goes back to McDonald's and FaZe Clan when they ran, a very big promo about who's the next part of FaZe Clan. And McDonald's actually changed their hashtag to FaZe McDonald's, right? So there's great ways for the brands to also support your activations by retweeting, reposting, commenting, sharing, getting involved with those live streams and also the promotion around it. Because again, there's going to be, millions more followers of AT&T than one of your streamers. But if you can somehow collaborate and figure out a way to leverage the AT&T's, social followings to help promote it and advocate for it, or bring together other elements where you're cross-pollinating, that's another key things. And Jimmy, that was a great point, because the broader distribution you're getting, the better experience for everybody involved. We want to get as much distribution and reach as possible, and brands can have a great power to do that with their own followers and brands. And another thing I just want to mention, and this hasn't come up yet, but I also want to just call out Reddit, because that's another community that we're seeing a tremendous amount of sharing and comments and going back and forth on. So not only would I suggest Twitter, but I would also suggest Reddit, because that really has become a huge community element as well. So just something else to think about.
Great point. And I think we'll start transitioning to the next slide here. But I think from our side, we hear all of the time, I think sponsorship has still been pretty consistent to what it is, and we'll go through kind of some of these assets. But I think, just to kind of put a pin in our last point, the influencer space has changed. Even in the last 3 years, instead of just Instagram, now it is their Instagram, their Twitter, their Twitch, their TikTok. And now, as you guys have said, now it's about the streamer, the influencer themselves, and the network that they can reach. I think the orchestra of how these campaigns work is going to kind of continue to ever change. So when we talk about activations within stream, here's some really good examples of ways to activate. So there are a lot of tactics that you can leverage within in-screen. So we have physical banners, in-stream banners, jersey patches, some product placement, QR codes. Another way that we can kind of get some semblance of attribution is how many people are going through to that landing page, chatbot, Twitch extensions, and surveys. It is gone, it is really kind of grown more and more. I think we're going to continue to see platforms provide more and more of this. But Shelby, would love to get your thoughts on kind of how do brands over at Wasserman or AT&T think about, from a value perspective, kind of what assets here drive the most value? And then Cody, would love to understand, once kind of Shelby's wrapped up, kind of what we hear from our customers and what is driving the most value for them.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny, when I see jersey patches, that's one thing that we've done a lot of work on, both in the gaming space and outside of the gaming space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one thing that we say, there's something unique because it has this more contextual nature of it, as opposed to just being, another logo in the stream. But I think we've used all of these, or nearly all of these tactics with different clients. I think we really like to see things, and I think it's really easy. If you look at the top row, that stuff's really easy to explain to people not in the gaming space, because there's really similar things that happen in the sports space. And so you can make those connections really easily. And quite frankly, not to, simplify it, but we value those assets the same way we would value them, in a sport type event. So if it's going to be, when we talk about it in stream banner, it's going to depend on where's that placement? How big is it? How long is it going to be? Is it, static or dynamic? There's all those things. I think we really have enjoyed doing things, whether it be with, a chat, like more interactive things, whether it be with the chat bots or QR codes, to sort of get people to go further down, not just seeing the branding of our clients, but get them to go further down that purchase funnel. And I think, as there's more stress in general in the industry about providing results beyond the impressions you garner, I think the more engaging tactics where you can have more of those one-on-one conversations are going to become more valuable to brands overall. But, you got to start at the top and they got to know you're there. So you got to start with those branding assets. And then after that, it's how much can you engage with them to give them that special type of experience. So again, similar to what you said last slide that we had a lot of pictures on, all of these things serve a place, but it's all about, where you are in your life cycle. And, we have a framework, depending how long you're in the market, and things like that too. So when you're just getting into gaming, you probably need to focus on more of the awareness space. But when you're in there 3, 4, 5 years, I mean, that's
the attribution up.
Yeah, you can start doing other things. And the other thing that I would, note is gaming fans are also, I want to say, more critical of brands in the space a little bit.
Sure.
And finding that correct, authentic integration is really important as well. So I think what we sell, when we're talking to brands about getting involved in gaming, we talk about, like, here's the value return just for the assets. Like, that's great. But like, the way that you're going to resonate with gamers long term is if you have a really authentic experience. And it is something, and we say this all the time, what do gamers want? How did this brand or sponsor make the experience better? If they're not, they can get a little fickle with us. And that's, not, when you're representing brands, that's not really what we want.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we're going to see, just a quick shout out for Shelby. We're going to see some nice AT&T jersey patches coming up in Worlds with Cloud9. So, that's a great opportunity to see it in action.
And 100 Thieves, both of our team partners are in Worlds this year. It's a very exciting time for us. Yeah, we're excited to see that attribution there.
Yeah, that's very, very good call. I think, Shelby, you kind of bring up a good point. I think when you look at this board, any sponsorship salespeople out there, this is television up top, and there's an enhanced engagement layer, and that is what the bottom row really represents. So I think it's kind of TV, the plus version, where you're getting that kind of authenticity. But Cody, for you on kind of how brands have been receiving metrics and kind of the success back, I guess, are there specific tactics that they've seen more value on, that they've leaned into more?
Well, I think Shelby really hit the nail on the head, and that's kind of the beauty of it, is it's not really, there's not a one size fits all approach. I think it really comes down to, like we've all said throughout this last 45 minutes, is it's about what's important to the brand. And through all of these different examples we see on the screen here, there's different ways to try to get that organic reach and, try to be as the least intrusive route as possible, because the last thing you want to do is be the person who's just slapping a logo on the screen and making the experience really bad for the viewer. And there's a ton of different ways that you can get awareness out there, get engagement. I think for a lot of our clients that are super interested in more of the participatory engagement metrics, we've seen a ton of success with some of these branded chatbots, because it's, again, taking advantage of the communities. It's taking advantage of the conversations that's happening with the core audience, because it's one thing for audience to see the McDonald's French fries pop up on the screen. But if you have a chatbot that's sort of trying to direct the conversation a little bit, giving you some clickable links, getting some topics of conversation going, because I think there's a ton of value in being able to go directly where conversations are happening. And I see a question popping on from Bobby. And yeah, that's a good question, Bobby. That's something, as you guys can imagine, we get a ton of questions around the types of logo appearances. The good news is, we have a really good tool that we can kind of help to differentiate different sorts of logo assets. So obviously, again, it's not a one size fits all. That Intel logo that's in the top left of those examples right now, obviously that has a bunch more of exposures than an in-stream banner could have on the bottom. So in terms of, how important a logo is, I personally think that it's about the clarity of it and how close it is to the center of the screen. Like sometimes it's not necessarily going to be how big a logo is. It could be a really huge logo in the background, but it's on the top left where your eyeballs might not go all the time.
Yeah.
So again, on our side, we're kind of fortunate that we have some kind of sophisticated tools that we can kind of weigh those sort of calculations there to give some more kind of directional advice there. But in my opinion, I think that's the kind of beauty of something being on screen where audiences are looking at, they might be watching on a tablet, they might be watching mobily, they might be watching on a laptop. It's not like, when you're an in-person arena, you need to have the biggest signage. That's not always going to be the case here. It's about things like closeness to the proximity to the center, clarity, all that kind of good stuff. So
yeah. And I think on the next slide too, if we can go over and flip to that one, we can kind of talk about that a little bit more. I think Shelby touched on a really good point around also time on screen, like making sure if it is, like to your point, Cody, if it's a huge banner, but it's in the background behind the casters, after about 30 seconds, you'll kind of forget it's there, similar to that ESPN logo bug. So, but kind of as we think about this, and this is a really, really good simplified view. So any brands or marketers that are tuned in, this is kind of the value points of these given broadcasts and what you should expect and the measurement to kind of provide. So earned media, that's really where your logo exposures are going to come from. How much exposure is my brand getting? How many people are tuned in? How many people are talking about it at the time? You're really going to be measuring engagement more through the chat function, right? So making sure you can see how many brand callouts do we have? How many command prompts were executed to pull out our chat bot that's going to link to 20% off your next order. Reach obviously is going to come from the audience, hours watched, how many people are tuned in. And then the attribution part to that, Twitch extensions have been a really interesting piece. And maybe Jimmy or Lewis, you could kind of speak to kind of how that has changed activating. But I think that's another way we can get a little bit into the weeds a bit more on the attribution side from the live streaming perspective.
I'll defer to Jimmy on that one.
Oh, I was going to defer to you, Lewis. I thought that you were so eloquent with how you kind of shared on your previous comments here. Yeah, guys, really not my expertise, honestly, because what we do is we measure companies and we tell their stories, right? We see what they're doing, what trends they're leaning in, what's successful for them, and then what partnerships we see as a result of that. So my knowledge is more I think as a bystander and less of someone that's directly working in that space and experiencing it. What I can share about the value of these different types of earned media placements. I think for starters, what we're seeing too, I mean, some of the guests that we've had on our programming are sharing how just to facilitate or to keep the relationship happy, a lot of these activations are digital, right? So they're really low lift. It's really just a matter about where that activation is taking place. If it's in the chat bot, if it's a banner overlay, it's not always a physical good that needs to be shipped to that streamer or to that content creator's home. And because of that, there's also the opportunity, I think, from the earned media perspective, where you can make that partner happy by giving them increased brand value, by giving their brand increased value through free placements on your stream, right? So just because the contract says we're going to drop X many, shout outs in the chat, why would you stop at that? Or why wouldn't you include them if you don't have a sponsor on your banner? Why wouldn't you include them there also for that increased value to make them happy, to show that you have sponsors in all of these different ways that you can activate because the lift is so low? I think that mentality of going above and beyond and doing more, particularly valuable we had Steve Aronset from Team Liquid on our show, 100% retention with their sponsors over 7 years. That blows my mind, right? And that's, I think, because they go above and beyond. They see what makes the sponsor happy, where they're activating, and then they think, well, not only can we drive sales or clicks or meaningful value, but we can also increase that value through these low lift additional digital activations. So again, guys, kind of a limited perspective here just by the nature of what we do, but hopefully
Yeah, I think totally fair. And I think all good points to bring up. I guess, Shelby, have you guys looked, I think this is just further ways to integrate with Twitch as a platform, but has any of the brands on your guys' side looked at more of the extension route, or is that still something that brands on your side are starting to just learn about?
Jake, we gotta crawl before we walk. I think we're always, and I think a lot of times that's like a big part of like the job, the job of my broader team is to like figure out like what's next. But I think we have to figure out, how well that is made before we start. I think right now, and every brand's in a different place, but right now, sometimes we're just happy when we're getting them involved in this.
Yeah.
Even in a really limited way. So I think but I think when it comes to, again, what I've seen from the Twitch extensions, anything that's going to allow for more like interactivity and things like that is going to be stuff that's going to get brands down the line once they buy in. And I think Lewis said it earlier about like, you use some of these platforms to bring them to the platforms that you can monetize. And like brands see it, the same way too, that like, we want the brand value. And then as like sort of Jimmy said, but then we want the next step of it as well. So if there's more ways that we could be integrated on a Twitch or a YouTube, which is, where an influencer really wants to stream because of that, they can monetize that platform. We want to be integrated all those different ways and connect with their fans in all those different ways. So I think we got to crawl before we walk.
Yeah.
But I think it's definitely, the more options there is, the more ways that we can get creative and we can get innovative to figure out the best way to really have a win-win situation. The content and the things that we've seen work the best is when the brand and the influencer, the brand and the team have the same goal.
Yeah.
Because then you're all working together to sort of blow it up, really.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's super helpful as well. And I think Twitch will continue to develop better solutions, which is why they've been working so hard on the dev side. But yeah, I think that's a great point. And the more foundational you can have that understanding, the more you can deeply integrate. So let's kind of transition to talking. I know we have about 3 to 5 minutes left here. And so we can kind of talk through some of the fun things, but what brands are gamers talking about? So we picked 2 categories here. If we could change to the next slide. Perfect. So who are they talking about? So we have some QSR brands, McDonald's being number 1 with 33% of the market, Nike number 1 on the apparel side. But I guess from your guys' perspective, any brands you're surprised to see here? I think seeing KFC at number 2 is a little surprising to me. I think that's great. I guess I've been a little less aware of their activations as of late, but any reactions here?
It's interesting with KFC specifically because of all of their esports and gaming sponsorships have been coming from the UK primarily. The US team has been getting there, but they've done some amazing things. You've got the KFC the computer, the warmer, which I thought was really clever. Wendy's we know has been spending quite heavily in the gaming space in terms of paid media. They've really been diving in. McDonald's has been doing a tremendous job on their activations with sponsorships and teams. They've got a huge FaZe Clan opportunity going on right now. They're doing a lot of things both locally and nationally. So they're really investing heavily into the both the paid and influencer sort of sponsorship side. So it really doesn't surprise me. I'm Burger King is an interesting one. I haven't really seen much of what they're doing, but they're definitely trying to do more right now. So it is a great mix of brands that we're seeing, and they're definitely investing in the space. So it's certainly paying off, I guess would be the through line on that. They're getting great returns on their investment.
I think one thing that's pretty fascinating, like for McDonald's, for instance, of just a few years ago, I felt like most of their activations around the space were largely out of Germany. They weren't really doing too much in North America. And then how quickly they've been able to kind of come through and rise up. Because I think that just shows, again, to Shelby's point earlier, when you are getting into a space, there is a lot of growth opportunity to get that market and understand, especially with brand equity like a McDonald's. So really, it's like you kind of have these audiences that are sitting in gaming kind of waiting for their favorite brands to show up because not all of them have been activating yet. So I think McDonald's is a really good representation of that. If all of a sudden they are now number 1 far and away as the most kind of saturated QSR brand. So I think that's really, really fascinating. on the apparel side, I guess I'm not too surprised by Nike. We see an enormous amount of logo exposure just naturally from people collecting Nike shoes and having in the background of streams. So we see that all of the time. They have sponsorships as well. But I guess, Shelby, from kind of the activewear side at Wasserman, are you guys seeing those sports brands, I guess, kind of position themselves more towards gaming too?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that. And I even think, one brand that I wouldn't be surprised to see in the future from the apparel side is, I think, like New Balance is doing a lot of pivots towards the younger space. I've read this week, I want to say, about, they're pivoting to NBA, but they're trying to, and it's funny because I grew up with like my dad wearing New Balance like shoes. So thinking like, but they are pivoting to a really cooler space from a fashion perspective, but from a culture and where they're investing. So, and again, this is not something that, I know is going to happen. I'm not, spilling any tea or anything like that, but it's a brand that I would say is getting really invested in the trends. And I would say if we look at this next year, I would be surprised if they weren't in this space a little bit more, because they seem to have some really smart people involved that are getting onto the right cultural, touch points. And
to that point, it seems like there's a big opportunity to kind of jump into the leaderboard there, because I was honestly kind of surprised to see the discrepancy of, it wasn't surprising to see McDonald's be number one total of all these, but to see that, Nike would barely crack the top 5 in QSR sort of thing, just to see how dominant the categories are there. So to your point, Shelby, any new sort of apparel, activewear brand looking to activate in the space, there's obviously a ton of opportunity. It's something that it seems like is huge in terms of streamer and creator culture, as fashion and lifestyle and all that sort of stuff picking up. So I'd be interested to kind of watch those as well.
Yeah, I know we're kind of running at time here, so we'll land on one last slide. If we could actually go to the Dragon Ball slide, that would be great. Awesome. So just to kind of land, one of the last, I think we were talking about Fortnite activations earlier, so very fitting for us to land on this one. But this is one of the more interesting kind of IP activations that I've seen pretty recently. I think when it comes to these open world games, their ability to allow like multiverse types of content in here and pull in different IP is really incredible. Where if you're playing like a single player story linear event, God of War as an example, you're not going to see a Master Chief skin showing up in God of War. But Fortnite, this is something where you can bring a lot of different IP. And so I think Fortnite or Dragon Ball's movie activation, they obviously had that coming out, got a lot of success. So I think we see a lot of other just studios like Sony getting involved with a lot of that. But I guess any thoughts here on kind of the activations? I think this is a really good use of how these are still really good drivers, not just for the Dragon Ball Z audience, but it's also good for Fortnite, and they see a huge jump in viewership.
I can just speak to this because we see this on our content trends all the time. And the fact that you're able to bring together different communities is incredible, right? I mean, how many times do we see Dragon Ball with Naruto skins coming together and people creating content? So it's the ability to blend all of these different fandoms, and 1 + 1 = 17 at this point, right? You're really seeing a massive amount of collaboration. You're seeing the ability to play with all of these different characters and bringing them together has really provided some very unique content opportunities and streaming opportunities, and it's really helped amplify and grow the viewership across it. So, I mean, that's the one takeaway from this, is the collaboration and cross blending of all these fandoms really has proven successful, and we're going to continue to see that.
Jimmy, Shelby, any closing thoughts on this? I think a really good way to kind of see, like, even if it is a short-term marketing period, I think this is still proof that you can still activate in gaming, even if it isn't some long-winded 6 to 12 month sponsorship horizon.
Yeah, not a lot, honestly. I would expect similar numbers in data around the Destiny 2, season release that they paired with Fortnite. And I mean, pick your poison, and I'm sure you guys can reach out to Jake and Stream Hatchet for that data, and they'll explain it to you. This, you guys know I love Fortnite. I went off on it earlier. I don't want to waste our last moments praising it. So
All good. Well, yeah, if we don't have anything else to add, we don't need to drag Fortnite out any longer. Amanda, if you could pull to the last slide, perfect. If anybody would like a 7-day trial, please scan the QR code here. But once again, I want to thank you guys so much for joining. I think this was really productive, really, really insightful, hearing kind of from each of your different disciplines, how to understand gaming, how to best activate, and most importantly, how brands and agencies are really valuing it. So appreciate everybody joining today. Stay tuned. We'll have more webinars and lunch and learns coming. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.